Welcome to another episode of Show Me the Firo, where I'm joined by a special guest, Key of Oxen, as well as Lucas and Ruben. Key, before we get started, if you just want to tell us briefly what it is you do and what is Oxen.
Yeah, so I'm the CTO at Oxen, which basically means that I manage the technology that we produce and the developers that we have on staff. What is Oxen? Oxen is a privacy-focused blockchain. The privacy-focused blockchain enables a network of nodes called the service nodes, and we run a lot of applications on top of that service node network. So you may not have heard of Oxen, but you may have heard of Session, which is our private messenger, or Lokinet, which is our onion routing protocol. Oxen is kind of the thing that brings all of those together. That's what I work on.
Yeah, I heard of Sessions. It's a little bit like a decentralized Telegram, from what I can gather. Is that fair to say? Kind of, but obviously with the privacy focus too.
Yeah, Signal is what I think of, because I was looking at it to replace Signal at one point.
Yeah, so it shares some lineage with Signal as well. We're actually originally a fork of the Signal code base. I would liken it maybe more to a privacy enhanced version of Signal with no phone numbers. We onion route your messages, and we don't use a centralized server. We kind of use this decentralized network to store messages.
Right, and from what I gather from just briefly going through the website, is essentially it's anonymized in terms of no metadata is stored. It's just you have your own digital ID, and that isn't connected with your real world identity. So that's how you keep that separate. And of course, you use your node network, your service nodes, to deliver the content and multimedia and things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
If you wouldn't mind briefly talking about your nodes, because I actually find these very interesting in terms of what you have implemented already in kind of what I would like to see at some point, maybe not in the near term, but what I'd like to see similar things implemented into Firo, because you for instance, you need 15,000 Oxens to create a node, right? And I do believe, can you self-host these nodes on it?
Yeah.
Is it a Linux? That's it. So you can self-host. It runs on the Loki network, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to briefly explain what it is and how you accomplish what you do.
Yeah, we were pretty coming from first kind of origins. We were very interested in the Dash concept. In 2017, and we thought what they were doing was really cool with master nodes, because at that point, it was much more about how many full nodes you had on your network at that point, how many copies of the blockchain you had. That was interesting to us, but what was more interesting was if you could enable this incentivized network of full nodes, maybe you could also enable incentivized networks of other nodes. Then we were looking at stuff like Tor, which is kind of community-operated onion routing protocol where people run their own Tor nodes and route traffic for other people. We were thinking, well, what if we could create an incentivized version of that? And that's kind of where all of the ideas were born out of, which is there's these services that are essentially common goods which people use. Can we actually make them financially incentivized networks? So we also looked at message storage as well, which is what we do on Session. So the service nodes do kind of a few primary tasks. They'll store the blockchain, obviously. We're a fully proof of stake network now. We started proof of work as well. But yeah, we've fully transitioned to proof of stake. So they'll keep a copy of the blockchain, sync new blocks, create new blocks. They will also, they used to checkpoint the chain, like you guys have with chain locks, but now we're no longer a proof of work. We don't need that anymore. They store messages for Session. They onion route data for Lokinet. They also act as kind of full nodes to the network as well, which is the most basic function. So yeah, we kind of looked at that idea of Dash and thought, what can we build on top of this?
You had a comment, Lucas, right? Because me and Lucas were talking earlier about Oxen and your node network. And
so what I was interested in was because previously, our master node network, it is one IP address static per master node and such. And so, of course, community members are trying to figure out if there's a way to achieve that without having to use a hosting service and so on and so forth. And so he asked a question that kind of was related to what I was going to ask too, so that's already out of the way. But one of the things that they did find was that when they wanted to use the Onion network routing, all that lovely jazz, the latency was too high. And you guys say that the latency on you guys' end is like super, super low, very low latency. So my question would be, do you think that would actually be feasible through something like Lokinet?
Do you mean that they wanted to sync the blockchain, for example, and do transactions through the underground network? Yeah. I mean, we don't do that right now. Like, it's not really necessary for the nodes in the network to communicate with each other through an onion routing network, because the IP addresses of nodes are already known. Really what you want is client privacy, right? So that when someone connects to a light node and submits a transaction, that they're not that they're not losing their anonymity. That's totally possible. And you can do that through Lokinet right now. Lokinet kind of acts as a VPN, so it just shoves all of your traffic through an exit node or through an onion or through a .loki service if you're using one. So you can definitely shove transactions into the Oxen network via Lokinet. But I think you would have trouble. Latency wise, it's not too bad. Average latency for sending something through an exit node is probably 700 ms or something like that. But for transaction submission, you're not really looking for, it's not really very speed.
Yeah. So that's around 2/3 of a second, is it, approximately?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So what is that relative to Tor?
So it really, the thing is, it really depends on the path that you get, right? Because you're going to choose these random hops through the network. So if you get a good Tor path, that's where the nodes are kind of centered closer together, so the hops are less geographically, you'd probably be down to 250 ms or something like that. If you get a bad path, you're probably going to be up right near 1 second for the round trip time. So I think we're kind of in the competitive zone with Tor, but I think the bigger thing with Lokinet is you can kind of it's protocol agnostic. Tor you can only push TCP traffic through, whereas with Lokinet it's more like a VPN. You can push all types of traffic, UDP traffic through as well, and our bandwidth is a bit larger than Tor is, I reckon.
Right. Okay. And I was just briefly looking at your website, and was there plans to maybe monetize the Loki network somehow, or with ONS or something, or was that to do with?
Well, I remember Session had the monetization. I didn't realize Lokinet had one.
We do have some ideas around that, and most of them are around the exit node kind of idea, which. There's essentially, we don't have the same type of exit node network that Tor has, where volunteers kind of run exit nodes and you automatically connect to them. We do have people running exit nodes, but you kind of need to manually choose your exit node. So it's much more like a VPN situation. You still have the 3 hops, obviously, before you get to the exit node. So you're provided a lot of anonymity there. But we're thinking of ways to try and make that happen, make that exit node purchasing process happen on chain, so that the chain can take a clip of the payment that's occurring. And then there's also ONS, which basically allows you to register a human readable name to a .loki address. So when you go to a .onion site in Tor, you'll see there's a URL and it's got a bunch of random letters and then .onion. We have the same system. The default system is that you have a bunch of letters and then it's .loki. But you can also pay for a mapping from a human readable name to that, random number string.
What is the cost then to an end user to use a Loki network in terms of paying an exit node? What is that relative to VPN, for instance?
So I don't think anyone is selling exit services yet. So most of the exit nodes that are up there are free. So it's free right now. But I think what will happen is, as Lokinet starts to get used more and more, while, people will not be willing to provide services for free because they're going to have to pay for the bandwidth themselves. So at that point, they're going to want to start charging, and we hope that we can insert the platform into that transaction so that it can charge like a small clip on whatever the exit node cost is.
Okay, that sounds actually quite interesting. Sorry, Ruben, I'm sure you've got a lot to ask. What did you wanted to cover some of the challenges that the Oxen team has overcome relative in how they compare to Firo and what we're facing right now?
I have a lot on my question list, but do you guys have anything else? I mean, I can start.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, oh no. Hold on. If it's a shopping list, Ruben, just give me 5 minutes.
Yeah, I do. All right. Yeah, I'll give you 5 minutes.
I just wanted to go over some of the limitations, which is torrents are not supported right now. I believe anything that embeds an IP, it can be an issue running over the Loki network.
No, not if you use an exit node, you'll be able to torrent.
Oh, you can. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
you can.
So it's competitive then. It's competitive with a VPN then, essentially, really.
Yeah, because you can carry any protocol traffic over the exit node. So yeah, there's no.
Yeah, I heard you can also do the streamings, and all kinds of stuff on it, right? So that's actually really impressive.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do we go about setting up a node? Because I just want to go over like the differences between the Oxen nodes and the Firo, and maybe what we could learn maybe from each other. But as I understand, it's similar to the Firo nodes in terms of it provides instant transactions, etc. But you've gone a few steps further in terms of increasing the utility of the nodes themselves, essentially to do a whole host of things. So let's say I want to set up a node. So I need to do like a time lock. So does that mean I keep my coins in my own custody? I just have to lock them for a period of time, right?
Yeah, essentially the same thing. We use Monero, so we actually expose the key image for your coins to the network, and basically, or the future key images for your coins for the network. So that means that the network can detect when you try and spend those coins, and basically just not allow you to spend them for that period of time that you're locked into a node. But they stay in your custody the whole time. It's the network just prevents you from spending them until you've registered and unlock like a transaction.
And how long is the time lock?
So by default, right now, I think it's the minimum period that you can run a node, I think is 45 days. I think we changed it recently, so I'm not 100%. It's either 45 or 30 days. You can run it for forever. Like basically you time lock your coins once, and then you just untime lock them whenever you want. So you can run a node for years, and there have been nodes that are running for years as well. Yeah. Yeah, especially to get like smaller stakers involved as well, because a lot of people won't have 15,000 Oxen themselves, but now we've set it up so that you can have 10 contributors to a node. So you can stake a node and put it out publicly. Like say you had 5,000 Oxen, you put 5,000 up there, and then you can go on Oxen Observer and see the nodes that are open for contribution. And then that one would have, for example, 9 slots available for the rest of the 10,000 Oxen in that node. So yeah, you can build nodes with your friends and stuff like that, and just have one person host the infrastructure and the other people provide the finances. And that's non-custodial as well. People just lock the coins in their wallet.
That's pretty cool, Ruben. What do you reckon to that?
I had incoming calls, so I wasn't like right now. But yeah, go repeat that. Sorry.
You could time lock, like a group of friends can time lock their coins and join them together essentially to form a node.
Yeah.
And I thought that was quite an elegant way of doing it, because you don't also, if you're self-hosting, you don't have the mining cost, the ongoing cost either, right? I was also wondering, what is the minimum specifications in terms of hardware to run a node? I mean, if I've got my computer here now, and I've got 15,000 Oxen, what kind of computer do I need? And what kind of bandwidth do I need?
Okay, so it's 40 gig of storage, 4 gig of RAM, 100 megabits or faster connectivity, 1 terabyte per month or more. And yeah, Ubuntu, at least Ubuntu 18.4 plus.
So let's say I have 90 megabits per second. Can I actually create a node, or is there like a gatekeeper that says no, you're too slow if you're just under that margin?
We used to have a service that would basically run client side before you set up your node and tell you whether it thinks that your node is sufficient or not to run on the network. I mean, it's just a client side check, so you can just literally bypass it. But I don't think we even have that service in right now. I think the reality is most people are using VPS providers to host their nodes. And most VPS providers are providing this level of service, right? And it's not that expensive. Usually the lowest tier is going to be 2 to 4 gigabytes of RAM and 100 megabit uplink.
Because that's essentially what we do also, is most people use all nodes because it's fast and easy. You can set it up really quickly. And it's just simple.
We don't rely so much on specific
providers.
So for example, we just try and direct people towards general infrastructure, Hetzner, DigitalOcean, all of that stuff, instead of using a node specific.
Well, really, all nodes just use that infrastructure also. But also, I'm saying is, once you get back to who they're using and who they're using, it's really just one big corporate infrastructure, and that's one of the things that, me as a Firo user, I want to try and get away from, in terms I would be able to self-host entirely. How I look at it in terms of these corporate infrastructures is these people are easy to regulate relative to the home hosters at home, that it's hard to actually police all those people, but you can actually just introduce a regulation and companies have to abide by that or go jurisdiction shopping.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I think I kind of disagree with it, honestly, this philosophy. Not to throw a spanner in the works too much, but the level of service that you can provide from a home internet service provider is going to be way less than what you can provide in a data center. Just because home internet service providers are not providing the same level of SLAs or guarantees that data centers will provide. And also, there's so many data centers now, all around the world, and run by different companies, that you can kind of jurisdictionally arbitrage yourself by choosing different VPS providers. So, I mean, if you had to look at the Oxen network, I mean, look, we're not perfect, right? I'm not saying that, because I think there's 20% of our nodes are hosted in Hetzner. And if you were to add the top autonomous systems or ISPs, you're probably going to get 50% of the nodes within 3 or 4 ISPs, right? And that's not perfect. But I think when you're thinking about the level of service that you provide to the network, with onion routing and message storage, it's really important that that service be super reliable. It's less important, I think, if you're just syncing copies of the blockchain and doing transactions, because you have a lot more latency boundaries and stuff. It's not, you don't need that much. But when you're onion routing, it tends to be that you need to rely on these infrastructures that are set up. So yeah, I think it's an interesting idea though.
There's talk in the EU, for instance, right now of they're discussing the legality of privacy coins going forward, right? So they're discussing that as of now. But if you look at where most of DigitalOcean servers are, I mean, for instance, just loads are in Europe. Right, and that could be a huge disruption to an entire blockchain should legislation be passed. And then there's, of course, that could prohibit that, because DigitalOcean is going to comply. It's not that they're going to buck a government.
Wouldn't your home internet service provider also comply with that if you're in Europe, for example?
No, not if they don't know. Not if there's a private connection and they can't, and the data's encrypted. They won't know you're hosting.
And what would the difference between a VPS provider and that be? You can have encrypted VPSs, right, where you have an encrypted connection with the network.
Well, I'm not sure exactly how they work, but can they see, for instance, detect? They can run maybe a tool on their network to see what clients are running, and therefore ban the network, ban that VPS. If you're DigitalOcean, you can see what apps are running on your network and ban a VPS that way.
I think if you have disk encryption running, on your on your service.
Yeah, you
that
need
they
a key,
wouldn't-
I guess. Yeah.
that they wouldn't be able to do that, but they would definitely be able to watch your outgoing connections, for example, and see that you're connecting to, particular other nodes on the network. But then your home ISP would be able to do that as well if you're in Europe. For example, if they pass this legislation. But I think like even in that case, like I think you just have like a mass migration of nodes to like the United States and Canada and other like non-EU countries in Europe, like Romania.
That's true,
like,
but
there's already
I'm just saying that that's less ideal though if that was the case, because the question is when you don't know where whether a government's going to be favorable for like forever, or it's just a cat and mouse game and eventually you've got nowhere to run to. So ultimately you need to make it so you cannot be taken off, it cannot be taken down in terms of the network. A bit like mining, how it's so easy in terms of you just plug in your card, connect, and it's really hard to censor, particularly if you have it running through a VPN or something.
Yeah, totally. I think we need to think more about this, especially if like relevant legislation passes. It'll definitely become more of an issue.
Right. Okay. All right. Sorry to hijack that for a while, Ruben.
Well, actually, I did have a real
Lucas
quick
has a
question.
question.
So, so the our Mastodon network, the rewards are based off of a queue and so on and so forth. And so, unfortunately, if you have any kind of hiccup, you get knocked to the back of the queue. And then if you have too many hiccups, it gets basically deactivated and you have to reactivate it or fix it. So actually, I had a question about that. So on your network, do you have effectively the same thing? And if so, what are the penalties for having hiccups?
Yeah, exactly the same. We have an ordered list, and you start at the bottom of the ordered list, and when you get to the top of it, you get paid out. But we actually kind of use that knocking the people to the back of the queue as like a punishment almost. Like, so for example, if your IP address changes, we knock you to the back of the queue. But we also have more severe punishments, usually we call it decommissioning. So for example, if you're not online for a period of, I think if you go offline it's pretty complicated because as you're online more, you earn these uptime credits essentially. So you can earn up to, I think it's 24 or 48 hours worth of uptime credits. And then if you go offline for a significant period of time, that's okay as long as you have enough uptime credits to essentially be offline for that period of time. But if you, for example, if you just join the node network, you start with 2 hours of uptime credits. So if you join the node network and then go offline for more than 2 hours, you'll be deregistered from the network. And then what happens if you're deregistered is your coins are locked up for 30 days and you don't earn any rewards on them. You can't move them. So there's essentially like a punishment of like opportunity cost. You could be staking your coins, you could be selling them, you could be doing other things with them, but instead you're locked up in the network for 30 days. You can't do anything with them. So that's kind of our punishment for non-performant nodes. And we have a bunch of metrics that we'll deregister people for. The biggest one is being offline, but like not having, for example, like the storage server software, which is what we use for session. If you don't have that online, we deregister you. If you don't run Lokinet, we deregister you. If you don't run the blockchain services, we deregister you. So yeah, there's a bunch of little things like that, but we do have a system in place to like help operators as well if they randomly go offline, like, their VPS provider like turns their thing off for a couple of hours, then they'll be able to get back online, especially if they've earned those uptime credits as well.
Yeah, that sounds fair to me, and that's actually a good solution, I think, in terms of rewarding, carrot and stick essentially.
Yeah.
All right, then, Ruben, and the floor's yours.
All right, so one of the reasons why I wanted to bring Oxen on the show was like the history between like Zcoin and Firo with Loki and Oxen is we have a lot of shared history, and I think it kind of started when I met Simon, I think at one of the conferences, and I think back then we were Zcoin and Oxen was actually called Loki. And I found like, wow, we actually share a lot of similar values. And look, we both went through a rebrand. We both had headaches with miners. And of course we took similar but different paths. So I really thought, like, we, rather than, yes, I know the show is called Show Me the Firo, but I thought it'd be interesting to introduce our community to other like-minded projects, and especially ones that kind of went through similar challenges in us, which I think would be very educational for both our community and also the team as well. So I guess one of the first things is that, I don't know if you want to comment publicly, because I know it's water under the bridge, but, you had an experience with miners and proof of work, and, obviously decided to go down proof of stake. If you don't want to comment on that, I totally understand. But, for me, it's something that I think is an interesting question, because we went through it ourselves. We went, I guess, through a more gradual type of approach, but wanted to hear your thoughts on it, if you are okay to comment on that.
Yeah, totally. I have no worries speaking about miners. So yeah, I mean, for the first 2.5 years of Loki, now Oxen, we were proof of work. So we started off using a tweak of the Monero algorithm, which I guess at that point was I think we launched with Kryptonite Heavy.
Right.
And then we did a tweak, because what would happen is with the Monero stuff is you'd launch a mining algorithm, and then someone would build an ASIC or for it, or some FPGA, and put it on your network, and then basically the hash rate would go fucking crazy, and you'd have some pool which was super concentrated with 90% of the hashing power or something like that, and it became a huge risk for the decentralization of the network. So then we switched to Kryptonite Heavy with a tiny tweak to it, so that people who were mining Monero couldn't just come over and mine us or whatever. But it just ended up becoming this endless cycle of making small tweaks to an algorithm and then deploying it to the network. And I think that was around the time that RandomX, or around the time that proof of work and RandomX were being discussed, and we were quite interested in this. We were quite interested in deploying something like that, but then I think we'd already launched our service node network at that point. We had all of these nodes, and we were I mean, there's proof of stake coins out there. Why don't we look to see if we can develop something on the proof of stake side of things? Because we already have 43% of the network is staked into nodes. We already have 1,700 nodes, so we have a fairly good decentralization aspect. This is perfect for a proof of stake chain, and offers a lot of natural advantages as well. I think you never need to worry about a 51% attack anymore. Well, I mean, it's possible to get.
If I buy up all the Oxens,
yeah.
What would happen in that case? Are you able to identify which node in which Oxens are malicious and then fork away from that?
Yeah, exactly. It would be it's the same as any proof of stake network. You can work out.
If you could lock those coins essentially and then not have them interact, that's essentially a way to get rid of a lot of supply essentially on your chain, right?
Yeah.
So aside from the service disruption, the damage that would cause, the remaining holders you'd have way less supply, and then therefore essentially a more scarce asset.
Yeah, that's one of the advantages that people talk about with proof of stake, is that you can kind of attack once, but once you attack, your nodes can be identified and your coins can be slashed. Whereas with the proof of work network, unless you change the algorithm, the attack can just continue to happen to you as long as the hash power exists. So yeah, that's a massive advantage. But yeah, I mean, we just didn't want to keep tweaking our algorithms every year. And also the behavior from miners was very lackluster. They were not very involved in the community. We'd see a massive portion of miners would just mine through a single pool. We'd try to put out information being hey, do you guys want to move to a different pool? It would be great, because it's not super centralized. But they're not even listening. They probably don't even know what your coin is almost, right? They see the profitability number and then they turn their miner on and point it towards your coin. They don't know anything about the community or anything like that. Now, there is a small portion of miners that are super involved in the community, which is cool. But you have to weigh that against the amount of miners who just get your coins, dump them immediately, and are not involved at all. So I think we just weighed all of that up, and we already had a really good setup with the node network as well. It wasn't like we had to build proof of stake from scratch. We had a lot to work off there. So we decided, I think 3 years in, that we were going to switch to proof of stake. And I think it's had a lot of positive benefits. We've never faced an attack on the proof of stake side.
Wasn't there a brief period where you guys used RandomX for a short while, and then I think there was like botnet problems? Was it, or did I?
There was I think there was a period where we used Kryptonite heavy, and at that point, I think we never had an attack, like we never had a blockchain rollback or anything like that. But we did have some pools that were like 60, 70% of hash rate. And that was concerning to us, like really concerning. Those pools were like good guys, right? But you're not gonna like just rely on like the good guys staying good. So
we actually have this exact same problem right now with Firo. Like right now, the CFC, the Community Fund Committee, is actually offering a 10% bonus to any participating pool that is not controlling more than, I think, 30 to 40% of the hash rate. And right now, I think it's still like 80% on the single pool. And like, look, there's already monetary incentives to be on this site stuff. And as you said, like the response from, of course, they are good miners, they are shifting, but they aren't the majority, right? And I totally understand that. And I guess one of the things that you know I liked about proof of work, at least in theory, was that, you know, it was kind of permissionless. You didn't really have that much infrastructure. You could run it off your home computer. But as you said, I actually went through the same process myself, because I also am a miner, and I was like, oh, what should I mine today? And I'm like, oh, okay, let me go on what to mine, see what's on top. And I see something like Casper, didn't really know much about it. I was like, well, I'm just going to mine it. And I was like, yeah, I'm exactly doing the same thing that any other GPU miner would do. So you can't really, it's just as simple that it has become right?
It's the incentive structure, isn't it, of like how humans behave, right? It's just natural humanity in terms of inaction. What I wanted to ask, Key, is have you noticed any kind of negative aspects, any disadvantage to moving to proof of stake versus proof of work? I know your nodes are different in terms of they have like more utility in terms of providing like content essentially and performing other services and just payments. But is there been any disadvantage that you've noticed? And it could be like from a technical perspective or just from a community perspective in terms of going proof of stake.
Honestly, I can't say there's been much of a disadvantage. Maybe the fact that we did lose a bit of the community when we switched to proof of stake that was mining based, and maybe just around like the complexity of it as well. Like I think proof of work is easier to understand than most proof of stake systems. But other than that, like having a network or a community of people who are actually staked in to the network, who are receiving majority of the new supply that's created, like that's been massive, probably massive for price as well, because you have these people who are already holding like 15,000 Oxen, for example, or they're with a group of friends that are holding it. They're already holders of the coin. So like when they receive new coin, they're more likely to continue to hold it than someone who's just mining purely for profit,
because they have skin in the game, so to speak. They're invested financially and probably to a certain extent emotionally in the project, right? So.
Exactly, yeah. And so I think that really creates a massive benefit for the price of your coin, in terms of that there's not so much supply being emitted and dumped as soon as it's emitted. But yeah, I mean, on the negatives, I would definitely go back to those points. Is like it's hard to build as well. Like we probably spent a year like building and deploying this. So you know, think about the dev time that's involved in that. That's pretty significant. Especially, I mean, maybe it would be easier now because there's few more proof of stake systems which are kind of drag and drop. And you could probably copy some of the stuff that other chains have done. But yeah, I mean, look, the reality is that you guys are already using the Masternode network for consensus, because you're doing this like chain locks process, right? Which actually has precedence over the proof of work network. So you're already kind of
halfway there.
seeding
Primarily,
to, yeah. So you're
primarily
just,
proof of stake, almost
yeah.
probably now.
So you're pretty close to there already. You're just using the miners to create new blocks, and putting that process into proof of stake is not that hard. But yeah, I mean, it's been really good for us. And I mean, any Masternode project who has a like good decentralized network of nodes, I would recommend it for as well.
By the way, just to, clarify, because I know there's a lot of like very hardcore Firo people who are like, proof of work is the only way to go. There's no immediate plans to go like full proof of stake. I just wanted, Key to share his views on things, because I think it's very illuminating, because a lot of, the core team got a lot of heat for the recent tokenomics change where the miners were deprioritized, but it wasn't a spur of the moment thing. And first of all, it was decided by the community themselves. So like, it is what it is. Like the core team had very little votes in that game. But I do really want to kind of tell people like, I used to think that, because proof of work in a way has some benefits over proof of stake, in the sense that you don't have to have a VPS somewhere. You don't have to keep your computer on 24 hours. You can just join and leave anytime. On theory, it sounds really good. And especially as a privacy coin, that sometimes is important, because we don't know, look at the EU regulations. They're like, oh yeah, privacy coins are bad. Maybe next thing, like, hosting this type of nodes is bad. We've seen even, I think, was it Hatzner as well? You mentioned that they mentioned that they don't want to do like cryptocurrency nodes or something like that. So there's the kind of beauty of like, I can just run it off anything without, relying on like some VPS or cloud service provider. So I think that's a big benefit. But right now we're caught in a very weird situation, because if you take a look at regulations now, like, there was also talk about EU banning proof of work coins, right? So like,
I would say the regulation is much more negative proof of work than it is proof of stake. Like, you literally have states in the US banning mining, like New York, I think, recently banned mining outright. So I would,
I don't think it was outright. I think they're just preventing from like energy facilities from having permits to allow them to do it.
Right. Okay.
It was also in built-up areas too, in cities, I believe. It was something to do with that also. I haven't got all the particulars on that, but all I'm saying in terms of the proof of work vote that recently also happened in the EU, I mean, they're lucky that vote didn't come up after the war and the energy crunch, right? Because if there was public sentiment because they're paying God knows how much for electric bills, and you could just turn the public into all this crypto is using all this electricity, and this is why your bills are so high, and global warming as well, that you're going to essentially, it's not hard to turn the public to support a banning of such a thing, even if they're like essentially, to the detriment of their liberty.
Yeah. I think also, like, Ruben, you kind of explain this kind of like the vision of proof of work, which I think is a really cool kind of idea. That's like one CPU, one vote, and like, we're going to have all of these home miners running like in their spare laptop time, like, the mining process. Yeah. But the reality of things are that it's mostly like commercial operations that are set up in huge warehouses. And when you try and compete against that level, you have to take into account your electricity cost, right? Like if your electricity cost isn't like, cents on the dollar, you're just not going to be able to compete with people who are using like excess hydropower in like Kazakhstan or something. Like you're just going to get smoked. Like
or like a nuclear power station here in the US. I mean, a lot of them, their miners are behind the meter, so they just use the excess and they don't really have to pay hardly anything for their electricity.
And that's effectively what was happening with New York.
Yeah, I was saying to Lucas earlier that the biggest benefit to mining and why I'd want to mine now is just because it's like -10 outside and I want to heat my home. And at least if I get some like reward, it offsets my electric cost. But for money, I don't really want to mine for money. It's literally just, it's a space heater for me right now.
During the recent issues in Iran, there was a huge uptick in session users and a lot of people, like, once they hear Iran, they kind of put them in the same boat as North Korea, which I think is they're really different. Obviously, I mean, unfortunately, it got blocked. I think like a couple of days after that, and I just was wondering like what your thoughts were. Is there a way to make something like Lokinet or Session as a, like, I guess, nation state censorship resistant? Obviously, it may not be a huge goal right now, but I think eventually, that should be it, right? And I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that issue. Yeah.
It actually is kind of one of our bigger goals that's on our roadmap. I mean, just to explain like how it was blocked, like we have a service node network, right, which is comprised of about 1,800 service nodes, but they have fixed IP addresses and they're based all around the world. So what you can do as a nation state level actor is basically gather the IP addresses of every single service node on the network
and just block
and
them.
then block those at your nation state level firewall. So, we may be decentralized, but we're not decentralized enough to have like nodes coming up and down every few seconds to make that censorship really hard. So
Key, I just have a quick question. Don't you use the Oxen chain to track IPs? Is that what I believe you do? Do you do
yeah,
that?
So when you register your service node, you register with a public-private key pair. But you submit a transaction to the peer-to-peer network, which is signed by that key pair, which tells the network your IP address. So your IP address isn't in the blockchain itself, but is signed by a key which is stored in the blockchain. So you can change your IP address, but we kind of discourage it because it moves things around the network, so people don't, like the other nodes don't know where to talk to you potentially.
Yeah. So is there any solutions to this that you can envision?
So I think like Tor faces the same problem, right? So they have like a network of, I think it's 5,000 or 6,000 nodes right now, like on the Tor network, and they also get blocked to this same level. The way that they kind of get around it is to use a bridge network. So essentially, they'll have nodes that are not listed in the Tor kind of directory and that are discovered out of band, and then you can kind of add those manually in your client. You connect to the bridge node first, which the sensor doesn't know about, and then you connect out to the Tor network. There's a lot of like potential issues with that. I mean, one of the things is like, how noticeable is your protocol kind of traffic at the network level. Like there's stuff called deep packet inspection now, where the internet service provider will look at the packets and how they're flowing through their system and try and work out, what type of traffic this might be and whether this was related to the Tor network. There's ways around that by like kind of hiding the signature of your traffic in like by kind of attempting to look like other traffic, like normal traffic. But I think like the biggest node is at like the biggest issue is at the bridge node level, because if a lot of people start using one bridge node, there's sensors that scan the internet to try and find these bridge nodes, and then they'll block those. So it's really about like building a big bridge network, and I think the most promising thing to me looks like partnering up with an organization that already does this like full time. So for example, there's quite a few VPN companies that are set up to serve like censorship, like censored regions. For example, like Siphon is one of the big ones that tries to serve Iran and China and stuff like that. I know ExpressVPN, like they do a lot of work in China to try and get things on, to get people access there. So I think
I always worry whether they are honeypot.
A partnership with a. Well, the thing is, even if they are kind of a honeypot, you like question whether, because the traffic is encrypted and the destination that it's going to is an onion routing network, right? So even if it is completely controlled, like the ExpressVPN network, it doesn't really matter. They're only acting as like a proxy to the network. They can't actually discover much about your traffic because it's encrypted, and it's only flowing to the first hop in the network, and it's encrypted on the way back as well. So there's very little that they can kind of glean, even if they are giving all of the traffic to some sort of government. It's the same question you would ask if like, oh, is Tor useless because the first like the Chinese ISP logs everyone's data? Not necessarily. Even if you are going through a Chinese ISP, getting to the Tor network is better than not getting to the Tor network at all. So yeah, I mean, it's an ongoing strategy. We haven't solved it yet. There's several different approaches you can take, but yeah, those are some of my thoughts.
I mean, it's also a concern, like, similarly with Oxen service nodes and Firo master nodes, like all those IP addresses are exposed. And obviously, I think for you guys, yeah, the clients, the users of session don't really have to worry, but we also have to think about like, the holders of Oxen, the holders of Firo, like, ideally, these nodes don't have IPs exposed to them. That's why the master node system has served us well, but we're trying to look at other kind of consensus mechanisms, which hopefully may not require like a fixed IP address or something like that, which just makes it so vulnerable to certain types of attacks. I mean, it's always pros and cons, but I think it's a good goal to try to mitigate such risk.
Yeah, I kind of think that when you like run a service node or you run a master node or something like that, you're kind of explicitly giving up like an element of your privacy for that reward, though. I think that's part of like the contract that you kind of sign when you start running one of these services. So, I mean, I think we really try and focus on just like giving like the light clients like privacy. So like session users, Lokinet users, and people that are submitting transactions to the network. But I think like if you try and go too hard on like the master node or service node privacy side, you end up just you end up making the system a lot more complicated, and the amount of people you're giving additional privacy to is probably not that many more than if you just focused on client side efforts.
That's true, because like, maybe it's like a couple of thousand people running on nodes, as opposed to, I think right now Session has a couple of 100,000 users. So like, yeah.
Yeah.
In the censorship right now isn't the biggest issue, so to speak, right? But obviously your user experience is going to take priority as of now. But I think it's definitely something to consider planning for and to devote some resources to, just so that you've got like a contingency plan should the environment, regulatory environment take a turn for the worse.
Yeah.
This is just like something that we were looking at. Obviously, it's still early days. I think Lokinet isn't quite ready yet. But we were also thinking of adding like the Lokinet option to our wallets, so that if people want to sync or do their transactions over the Lokinet, they would be able to. I think that should be possible maybe sometime the first quarter of next year or slightly after. But just to let people know that it'll be a nice option. If you guys don't want to use Tor, you don't want to use a VPN, and it'll be nice to have that integration, and it'll be a nice work cooperation between two privacy projects. And hopefully, I think we're kind of running out of time, but they're like related friendly teams are also building like a cross-chain DEX, and obviously that's a really exciting thing. I think it's called Chain Flip. Maybe you want to touch very quickly on that, and yeah, that's all from me.
And you also wanted to mention some features with sessions, I believe, before we wrap this up. So,
I mean, just on the Firo side, like we're super interested in watching how, because for example, like we're a Fulcrum Monero, right? And in our first kind of 3 years, we focused much more on coin privacy, like sending transactions, receiving transactions, all of that stuff. I think like we we still enjoy like working on that stuff, but it's taken a backseat to working on like Session and Lokinet, which are these like kind of services that we're providing on top of our network. But we're very interested in like what coins like Firo and Zcash are doing like on the base layer, like privacy stuff, because we really haven't pushed anything like Lelantis forward. Like we're still using ring signatures, and I think ring signatures have a lot of like drawbacks to them. So we're really interested in what you guys are researching on the blockchain privacy side to see if we could kind of implement some of that stuff on Oxen. So
because Spark is kind of looking attractive relative to Monero in terms of how it works right now. So it's kind of like
I think the future is definitely like with zero knowledge proofs, 100%. I don't think ring signatures are the way forward, and I think even Monero is like working that out now, and they'll probably deploy something that's zero knowledge proof based. I think like in the next 2-3 years. But yeah, we're definitely looking at what Lelantis is doing as well, because we would like to kind of drop something in, like take something from another network and drop that in to improve the privacy of our own chain, because we haven't really focused that much effort on that, and you guys have focused a lot of effort on it.
I mean, Monero's like protocol, like the Seraphis actually like takes a lot of like key ideas from Lelantis Spark. So like actually a lot of the hard work was built from our work. Obviously, not to take away, they've also contributed back in, disclosing some early vulnerabilities in the protocol. So I think it's a good collaboration. But even as it is, I think our anonymity set will be a lot larger than what even Monero is planning to do, because they have that legacy ring CT infrastructure that they kind of have. Even when they move to the new protocol, it's still going to be like they're going to use our tech in a way to make very, very large rings, while ours is kind of like more approaching a global accumulator set. So there are different like trade-offs between the two. But yeah, sorry.
Oh no, it's good to know the differences in terms of, because I haven't been following Monero as much lately, and it's good actually to hear where the pros and cons are in terms of each approach there.
Yeah. So just on the Session side, I mean, if I would encourage people to go and have a go with Session. It doesn't require any personal information to sign up, so you just generate a key basically, and you can start sending messages. But yeah, I'm on Twitter and stuff, so my Session ID is up there, or you could just message on Session Keejef, Keejef, if you want to talk to someone. But yeah, super excited to talk to other privacy communities in the space, because I know there's not a lot of us, and we need to help each other out, because privacy isn't necessarily the hottest topic in cryptocurrency right now, although I think it should be.
You guys in Australia,
Yeah.
which I think isn't the bastion of privacy, so yeah.
Used to be a free country, pretty much. Is what I remember it being. Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah, a lot of that legislation is kind of crazy legislation. I mean, for example, like the Assistance and Access Bill, which passed in 2018, which basically says like, if you're a company that has access to this data, like you basically need to write like capabilities into your software to be able to access it. The good thing with Session and Oxen is that we don't actually have the data ourselves. Like we have this whole service node network which hosts the data, so we have like a very plausible defense to say like we literally do not have access to the data that you want access to. Whereas, someone like Signal, for example, that has centralized servers where all of the data is stored, it's a much more compelling case that the government could take to them and say, hey, you've got to build something for us to be able to scrape this off. Like, whereas we would have to say, okay, let's talk to the service node network and deploy this. Like, are the service node operators going to be happy to deploy some, sniffing tool? I don't think so.
Alrighty, well that's all we have time for
actually,
this week.
I do have a question. I held back because Ruben beat me to it, but and I apologize. It is a bit of a bump back, but thankfully I won't be touching on the proof of work, blah blah. I'm pro hybrid, but anyway. So since I am, of course, one of those people that are concerned about how to get a hold of a coin without having to, dish out cash, go through a centralized exchange, so on and so forth. Is there ways for people to get a hold of Oxen that doesn't require you to join one of the co-ops for a node or anything along those lines, a way that you can actually get a hold of it without having to dish out or swap?
Well, all of our emission currently, so that we have like 90% of our emission going to service node operators. There's 10% goes to the foundation. So there's no way to have coins emitted to you if you don't stake into the network. I would say like the easiest way
like a local Oxen, or like a local Bitcoin, or like a local Oxen to be able to do that.
So I would say like the easiest way is probably to go through, like if you don't want a KYC, the easiest way is to either like go through TradeOga, or we have a Ethereum bridge as well. So if you have like an Ethereum based asset, you can buy W Oxen on Ethereum, and then you can bridge that over into the Oxen ecosystem. I mean, you're probably still going to need KYC to get Ethereum or one of these ERC20 tokens. So it's pretty hard on that route. Like, yeah, you can't just turn your miner on and get like a few coins. But I would say like you probably, I don't know if you can do that with like, I don't know if you would be able to do that with Firo, depending on how much hash rate there is. Like if, for example, if you have your laptop,
right now you can't. Right now you can't. You lose way more money than just buying it from an exchange, or like finding someone who will.
My
like,
argument against that is that's only if you're looking at it from the perspective of earning something off of it. Like if I'm just interested in getting my hands on it, like then that's that. But
but then we could just have a faucet. We could have just have a little tiny bit of a Firo to play with.
Yeah.
But,
to be honest, if you go into the community, if you go into the community and jump into the session channels and stuff, and say that you're a new user and stuff, and you're willing to get involved in the ecosystem, I'm sure someone will give you a few Oxen. They'll send it to your wallet. Or if you want to start committing stuff on GitHub, use some of your skills. Then I'm sure someone. I know that there's people that donate Oxen all the time for reading articles or responding to articles. For example, in session, there's this like kind of libertarian group who like post stuff, and then if you respond to their thing, they give you Oxen. There's also an Oxen tip bot as well in Telegram. So if you write an informative post, sometimes people tip.
Technically, that's like a form of proof of work, right?
It's just called work.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you very much, Keith, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Alrighty. Bay now.
Bay.
See ya.